Now, All Things Real Estate continues on Full Service Radio, 830 WCRN. Once again, here's your hosts, Gary Kelley and Brad Avergon.
All right, let's get back to the second half of All Things Real Estate. I'm Gary Kelley with Lamacchia Realty, and I'm joined by Brad Avergon from
Fairway Independent Mortgage.
Named on a fairway, I'm convinced. I can say that. You can't, Brad. Brad, I was reading an industry publication. It's called Inman. That's the guy's name, by the way. That's where that comes from. And the article was mortgage demand drops to a 22-year low as rates rebound.
Yes.
So you look at that, and I don't want. We're not doom and gloom people here. We try to be positive. We try to be upbeat. We try to at the same time share things that are going on in the industry with our listeners and viewers. What are your thoughts on what's going on in the industry right now? Which I realize is a very open-ended question, but you're Brad Avergon.
That I am. So yeah, let me give you my thoughts on what's kind of going on. So let me put it in perspective. First of all, I've been in mortgage lending for 34 years, and I've seen
not bad for a 19-year-old.
Actually, it's 35 years. I missed up a year. I started April 1st, 1987. It's April Fool's Day. So, but yeah, so I've been doing it for a long time, and in that period of time, I've seen markets ebb and flow. I was in the business in 2008 when the market crashed. So I've seen up markets, down markets, sideways markets, and here's my feeling on it. Real estate markets naturally ebb and flow. They go up, they go down. If you look at what's transpired over the last 24 months, let alone the last decade, where we've seen a tremendous appreciation, but just the last 24 months, you see a market, number one, that had tremendous amount, as far as real estate values, tremendous amount of increases. You're talking about a 20% year over year increase, okay? That, from a historical perspective, over that 35-year period, is unheard of. That's unheard of, okay? That was stimulated by a Fed that was so concerned when the pandemic hit that the economy was going to shut down, that they threw in tons of stimulus money that you heard about, that a lot of our viewers and listeners may have heard about, but other money you didn't hear about, such as when they bought mortgage-backed securities. So, people right now, they're saying, oh, gosh, rates, I want to get that 2.875 interest rate. Well, that's long gone. Yeah, but it was just here, 6 to 8 months ago. Yeah, but that market has changed. And why has it changed? Well, when the Fed stepped in, they basically bought that market. And what they did is they lowered interest rates on mortgages. That's what they did artificially by jumping into the mortgage-backed security market. They lowered interest rates and held them down so that they could keep money flowing, so they could keep the economy moving. Well, as the economy strengthened, as we can see that the economy definitely came back in strength, they started to back off some of those things. And as they became more and more concerned about inflation, they really sped up the stepping away from stimulus. They, in some senses, it could be said that they overstimulated the economy, which is what's led to the inflation some of which has led to the inflation. Some of it was completely out of their control. They had no way of knowing that there was going to be a war breaking out in the Ukraine, which was going to change supply and demand, which has a lot to do with what happens in inflation and prices, okay? But the Fed, over the since actually November's when they started, not only stopped buying mortgage-backed securities, which drove interest rates way up again, but they also have been selling off their balance sheet. So all these mortgages they took on in the last 24 months, they're selling those mortgages off. So there's a lot of things that are happening in the background. I think that one of the good things, if you want to look for my mom always used to say, if you look for the rainbow, if you look for the gift, you'll find it. One of the good things that you can see out of this increase in interest rates is that competition for buyers who are trying to buy, for first-time home buyers specifically, who are trying to buy their first home, is getting to be less, because as interest rates rose, as they've risen since the beginning of the year, some people are either qualify for less, so they can't spend that extra money, or some people are actually just they're going to take a time out. They're going to.
What I'm seeing, Brad, is in a gross generality, the $800,000 buyer can now get a $700,000 house. The $600,000 is now $500,000. The people at that lower end, let's say that they're a $200,000 buyer, they're continuing to rent. And I'm actually seeing rentals where people are bidding over asking on rentals to try to get in because they need a place to live.
Right.
So it's causing, I'm going to call it compression at that end of the marketplace. It's definitely a deceleration, which I think, frankly, is welcomed by all.
I think it is. I think I think the focus of the Fed to put the brakes on the economy was and is needed. I think the mortgage area kind of got a little bit more than they deserved as far as how hard it got hit, because I think some of the spending that they're trying to curtail is consumer spending. So it might be things that people are putting on their credit cards. It might be buying cars, buying other different types of things, maybe even travel. And what's interesting, what I'm seeing is if you look at some of the travel numbers, airline reservations are way up, right? People are they're booking solid because it's the first time in many cases, myself included, that people have come out of their caves in 2.5 years, and they are just like, I don't care where I go. I gotta go somewhere. I just gotta go. I gotta live my life. And so whatever it costs, I'm going to spend it. And so there's some of that going on right now. Plus, the other part is that those that were able to save up because they couldn't go anywhere for 2.5 years. They weren't going out to dinner as much. They weren't getting on an airplane and flying to other countries and going on vacation. So they've saved up some of that money. So they're spending now. The Fed's goal is to try to curtail some of that spending. And as I said, it's translated into mortgage-backed securities because, quite frankly, the only tool that the Fed has in their tool belt is interest rates. That's all they can control. They can't control the stock market. They can't control the bond market. They can control interest rates. And so what they're doing is they're applying the brakes. And as I said, you're seeing that translated into higher mortgage rates. And I believe we're going to continue to see that at least through the end of the year.
I certainly agree with you on that. I don't think we're going to see mortgage rates down in the twos, perhaps again in our lifetime.
No, and barring a pandemic, they shouldn't have been in the twos. When you think about it, nobody knew it was coming. It wasn't a natural progression for rates to go that low. That was a stimulus to start up an economy that had basically frozen shut for a period of 30 days.
Right. I'll tell you where I'm feeling it, Brad.
Where are you feeling it, Gary?
I'm feeling it at the pump.
Oh, for sure.
I put gas in my car basically twice a week. You're running around, you're doing showings, you're doing what we do. And it was just under $6 a gallon last night. And that's obviously, you start to look at that and you start to say, scooters, Sue hates them when I talk about them, but scooters up in Maine are pretty commonplace. I don't see anyone driving around, Metro West on a scooter that has their driver's license. But as I start to look at that, I start to say to myself, at what point do we start to say, we're going to drive less? I know that a number of people are doing the electric car thing. That's a huge investment up front. And frankly, from my perspective, yeah, I still have questions on how electric cars play out over time with repairability and the batteries. I'm not saying that the car is going to, catch on fire and all that. I know that there's that view out there. I'm saying I have a car, it's got 70,000 miles on it. I have a sense of how long it'll last. I try to maintain it well. I don't have that same experience and knowledge personally on what would happen with an electric vehicle.
Yeah, I think there's, I saw an article the other day and it showed a bunch of little electric cars all stacked up. I wasn't in this country, but it was small cars. They were all stacked up, and basically the idea was the cost of the battery to replace the battery was more than the value of the car. It was like a junkyard. So I think there's still some growth that we have to have in those areas. But I think the bigger picture is this. The war that with Russia going into the Ukraine, that was not predicted. That created its own set of supply line issues, which exacerbated what we had been feeling from the pandemic. Okay. And so now what we've got, and it shut down fuel supply, which, a lot of the fuel that was going across the world was coming out of Russia. So there's a lot of issues that are coming to play here. I think in the short run, we're all going to experience a fair amount of pain, and we need to be prepared for that. I think it's important that our listeners, understand, do what you can to try to stay as liquid, try to minimize expenses you don't need to spend right now if you don't need to do it. But try to keep your cash flow and understand, like you said, pain at the pump, pain at the grocery store. My wife was gone in a couple of times last week, and she said the shelves are really not stocked. They're not quite barren, but they're certainly sparse. And I think that this is going to be felt for a little bit of time. The good news is, I don't think this is not a permanent thing. I think we're going to make some changes. I think they're going to, reallocate some resources, hopefully, and that over time, this will iron itself out. I mean, you can look at the great toilet paper crisis of 2020, where you couldn't find a box of toilet paper, and you thought, what's going on here? But it ironed itself out, and I think these issues will have the same.
Well, Brad, on the toilet paper thought, we're going to stop right there. I don't think we can top that. How does someone reach you?
Best way to reach me, Gary, is via my cell phone, which is 978-375-5531, or via email at brad@bradavergon.com. And Gary, how do they reach you?
I'm Gary at movewithgary.com and 508-733-6005. I'd like to thank Keith, Harry today, and all the other folks that participate in putting this together, and have a good month.
You as well, Gary. Be well.
You've been listening to All Things Real Estate on Full Service Radio, 830 WCRN.